I don't really want to take it off.
Coming up in tonight's episode, it's off with the old and on with the new. We've got a new scope sighting in to look out for a few problem Charlies.
What flavour is it?
Plus, I need to do some translation for the keeper. This, of course, is Team Foxer.
Well, hey guys, in today's episode, we're out foxing. Obviously, I'm not foxing from the pigeon hide. That's one for another day. But before we get on with the foxing action in tonight's episode, what I need to do is change the scope over. I've had my Hawke sidewinder scope now on my rifle for, well, pretty much since I've had that rifle, so I think that's about 6 years old. And it's time for a change. I've been taking shots more recently on foxes further than 200 yards, and I wanted just that little bit more magnification. I also saw the particular scope I'm putting on the rifle at the shooting show 2 years ago, and I really liked it. So I'll quickly show you the scope I'm putting on the rifle, along with a couple of the additional bits that I need to put on top of it as well to aid me in my shooting before we get on with the foxing action. I'll catch up with you in a bit.
Indeed, make sure you are subscribed so as not to miss some fantastic pigeon action, even if I do say so myself. I'll also have some details of a very exciting competition I'll have coming up quite soon.
The time has come to finally swap the trusty scope over on a 223. This scope has been in action for at least 5 or 6 years, and it's been incredibly reliable. I have previously mentioned, though, in a different video, I really want to go up a little bit in terms of magnification, and I also want to change the reticle as well. I don't mind this reticle, but I am a big fan of the little tiny dot that glows red, and that's really what I want to use for my foxing action. A couple of additions that I'm going to need for the scope. Some breakaway coasters, to put onto the zoom ring and the side parallax as well, because it makes focusing in when you've got to make those fine adjustments. I mean, usually speaking, for just general shooting, they're not overly necessary. Having said that, because I do a lot of filming, I always try and make sure the picture is nicely in focus, and making those fine adjustments, especially if you've got gloves on at this time of year, is very easy to do that with a couple of these nylon breakaway coasters. 5 or 6 quid, they're in the Team Fox or Amazon shop, and you can also find them on eBay as well. Second thing I need is a new one of these. So that's a scope ring with a weaver style attachments that goes neatly on the side there. That will enable me to be able to put my additional torches, mostly my PB IRL laser from Paul Baker, to help illuminate and give me that better picture quality with an extra infrared illuminator. Oh, one last thing actually, a little bit of tape as well, so a little bit of electrical tape. These rings don't come, unlike a lot of the scope rings you can buy that come pre-taped. Just one little bit of electrical tape on the top and bottom should help prevent any scratching and provide a nice tight grip on your scope as well. I don't really want to take it off.
The trusty sidewinder scope has been held in place for the last 5 or 6 years using these very good worn mounts, although slightly annoyingly they use a star key rather than a standard Allen key, but a couple of quick turns on both of the base screws either side and the whole thing will come off in one piece. One thing I do want to make sure I do before I put the new scope the new scope on, is give it a good clean. I don't want any dust or debris on the rail impeding with a perfect contact using these mounts.
Right, well, there's no going back now. That's off, and a couple of things I need to do. I still might use the night sight occasionally. Oops, a daisy. But this actual 30mm bracket here was too... the scope sat too low for me to be able to get it on and off each and every time. Yep. So that stayed on permanently. So I'll just give that a bit of a clean, because I shall need that to go back onto the new scope. Speaking of which, the replacement scope for the foxing setup is the Hawke Frontier. Now this model is the 4x24 LR dot, which has a very smart reticle. You'll see it anyway. You'll see it pretty soon. Size wise, pretty much the same. I've already put the sunshade on it. I have had it out and had a look through it. So yeah, pretty much the same size, but crucially it's got a 24 times mag. I've also already put some tape around it as well, because I will also use the pard, as well as some potential other rear add-on attachments as well. So because it's pretty much the same size, I'm hoping it should be a pretty easy transition from one scope to the next.
A couple of little tips I found useful over the last few years is to wind a small piece of electrical tape on the inside of your rings. It will help prevent scratching with metal on metal and give a nice firm contact patch to your scope. If you're using a breakaway coaster on your side parallax, make sure it doesn't impede with the illuminated reticle switch, also on the same side. To try and avoid nasty accidents, when cutting off the excess of the breakaway coaster, try and walk the blade through it because it will give. You don't want anything sticking out the top that's going to scratch your finger or get caught on gloves when you're using it. Since filming this little segment, I've actually moved the breakaway coaster so that when the handle is facing perfectly downwards, it's bang on 200 yards. It also means that my extra IR is within easy reach, so I can turn the IR on and adjust the focus all in one foul swoop. All that's left to do is give everything that one last check over, make sure it's all nice and tight, and head down to the range to make sure the rifle is sighted in perfectly at 100 yards.
Once I've got it sighted in, I'll attach the pard so you guys can have a little look through the scope and see the main reason of the difference why I wanted to go over to the Frontier scope from the sidewinder. So I've put the sidewinder back in its case, but I've brought it with me, and I'm going to zoom in. Once I've got the target down at 100 yards, I'll zoom in with the Frontier, and then I'll show you the difference of zooming in on 100 yards through the sidewinder. So I've got this target, I've shot this box several times, as you can see it's very holy on the back, so I've blanked it. I'm going to aim for this centre dot, so I've got a nice area around it. I'm only going to put it at 50 yards to begin with. Once I've got it close to that, I'm then going to go put it back at 100 yards, so I can go an inch high at 100 yards with a new scope. So 50 yards it is.
Now, just before all of the health and safety executives start harping on about safety, this isn't my first rodeo. I've used this particular spot for the last 7 years and shot thousands of rounds down it. Each and every one of them is safe. Although the camera flattens it out, the ground raises behind this, and behind that there's a thick belt of trees.
Well, I've got it near the dot now, so I'm going to move it back to 100 yards and fine-tune it.
So after taking just 4 rounds to get within an acceptable level of distance away from the target, I put the target back to 100 yards and took a further 3 rounds. You may just be able to see those holes on the target. It's almost bullet on bullet at that distance.
Spot on. Inch high at 100 yards.
The Hawke Sidewinder scope, as good as it is, as you can see here, it's not quite as clear as the Frontier scope, and the reticle I find is a little too busy. It's a very good reticle for using on rimfires because of the mil dot holdovers, but you really don't need that on a centre fire rifle. So it didn't take long to get sighted in. My confidence is good in the equipment. We now need a decent night to get out and christen the new scope, as well as the brand new hatch that Steve's had cut into his Land Rover 110. This means that we're able to socially distance and go out foxing to do our essential pest control at the same time. Although it can be pretty cold up top, one thing the hatch is good for is if you've got quite a lot of ground to cover, you can put the caller on the roof, have a quick call, and if nothing turns up, simply move on. The first thing I recorded through the scope here just to test the clarity was this pretty impressive looking roebuck. Luckily for me, it's only a short drive before we get to the pond area on the farm where we've often found a lot of foxes. I get out the icotec GC500 remote, crack open my favourite call list and put on the rodent distress. Almost instantly a fox stands up in the young wheat field and starts coming in. I stop it at just over 120 yards. It was too quick for me to capture it on film, but I did just quickly record Steve making the retrieve. He does make for a good retriever. It's less now than 25 minutes later, and in the same location now, the field on the right, I notice another fox making his way down that dike. Although it's quite some way off, I need to be patient because I really need this fox to get within the tree line. Although they're quite some way behind, there is a few houses there, as you can see. So just to keep everything safe, we've got to wait for the fox to get both within range and so that it hasn't got any of the houses in the far background. Although I'm shooting from an elevated position, safety always has to be your number one priority, especially shooting in the dark. You can see here a good example of just how much of a difference that extra IR illuminator makes for the sight picture here, as I just tweak with a breakaway coaster to get it in focus and stop the fox.
Smoking.
Using the Pulsar Accolade, it's very easy to find your shot quarry, even if they happen to go down in fields that have a little bit of vegetation.
He looks a bit bigger than the last one.
Dog fox.
Is it?
Yeah.
Handy. Got a bit of vixen around here somewhere then.
He's bigger than the other.
Yeah, that's what I said. He looked bigger, didn't he? A bit bigger, isn't he?
Yeah.
Stacking this.
Moving on a little later in the evening, again patience is the aim of the game here. Not caught this fox, we just stumbled on it while we were moving from one location to the next. He dips down, he's actually in a dike here in between two fields, and it's several minutes of me frittering around frantically trying to find it with the IR. I could see it in the thermal every now and then bobbing up and down, and again it's not until it looks up here that you can actually see that it is clearly a fox we're looking at through the MV. Rather annoyingly, it eventually pops up and in range. However, this side of the trees, of which you'll see in a second, or at least a bush, again it's a non-safe direction. I've got both the farmhouse and buildings in that direction. I just need it to be the right side of this bush. Sure enough, it goes the right side of the bush and then disappears. So I'm frantically once again trying to find it in the MV. Looking around, can't find it. Pop the thermal up and I can see it actually quite far over to the right. So I eventually stop it and it stops right in place of these reeds. Huh.
Cracking looking fox. Young dog. He's got a good set of tallywhackers on him. He's a little beauty. It's only a young one though, I think, isn't it? Yeah, pristine teeth. No more pheasant for you yet.
This is another one I mouth squeaked in and it came in like a steam train. before I stopped it, and it went with a nice pop. Having a cracking night so far, with several Charlies already on the deck and plenty of birds saved. This one is filmed a little bit out of sequence actually, so I took just a personal trip down to a farm which I've been controlling foxes on for quite some time. The farmer came out with his spotter because we'd seen this one actually from the farmyard. So I put the caller on, called it out, and I'm actually shooting off my Primos trigger sticks here using the Nate Vision pig saddle clamp holding the rifle. So although it might not be as sturdy as going off the Bipod, it does make for, I think, a pretty stable platform, and it enables me to be able to keep hands free whilst I'm shooting. I'll also put a link to those clamps down in the video's description. Back out with a keeper, and this time we come across two foxes in a field. This is the second time we've seen a pair of foxes. We also saw a pair at some distance. Here you can see one stood on top of a mound using the thermal, and then I ranged them. They were nearly 400 yards away. I looked at the same pair of foxes through the night sight on the rifle there, and again, even at that distance, you can clearly see that that's a fox's pair of eyes staring back at you. Those ones we had to leave. We didn't have permission to go on there, although we've since sought it, so hopefully we'll catch up with those foxes fairly soon. This pair of foxes I can do nothing about. There is just not a safe shot here, although one of them comes in and stays there long enough for me to be able to get a shot off. You could see those houses behind them, so just annoying, but again, it's not safe. This one, however, reads the rule book, comes in an absolute treat, and I remember to test the scope's capabilities of the illuminated reticle here as I flick the IR off, just so I'm not illuminating myself too much. I'll fast forward this a little bit because it was a good couple of minutes before this fox came within range. Very cautiously comes over the hill, and it's coming in fairly well as well. So we'll let it get a little bit closer before we take the shot.
One fox down.
Steve informs me it's my turn to go and pick it up because he's getting sick and tired of walking.
So I shot that one straight out in front of us, out the hatch of the landy here. Steve's just pulled forward, but he's down in the field. Right. Down in here. I wonder what flavour this one is. And that one came in a treat. Oh dear. It's made a bit of a hole. That one, pregnant vixen. Look at that. Yep. She's definitely in cub.
I'll answer a preempted question here. Do I feel bad about it? Not necessarily. Unfortunately, these foxes need controlling. So whether they're young or old, you know, we're indifferent about it. We're here to get a job done and get the job done we need to do. If it's not me doing it, it's going to be somebody else. So, and I'd like to think that we're pretty proficient now at making sure that we control foxes on our patch. This fox here was an interesting one. It was coming in an absolute treat. Wind was in our favour and everything. All of a sudden it decides to run off. It was actually the farmer's wife coming up the farm track that scared the fox off. Luckily, before she got to us, the fox stopped long enough for me to be able to get another shot off. This is turning out to be a very productive evening indeed. As the wind picks up and tiredness starts to settle in, we've got time for one more stand before we call it a night. I pick up this fox coming in a treat just in front of these collies here. As I flick over to the NV, the fox takes a little detour into the collies to get a little bit of wind protection probably. You can run, but you can't hide.
Got you. Over the ridge. Yeah. No, you know where the cover normally is? It's there. Yeah. It is 165 yards. Oh yeah, straight, just literally here. In that laying at the, you can see her eye shine, look. Now look, here. Steve. Straight there. Yeah. Up that sort of wheeling. Straight up there. Yeah. How powerful is this torch? The old hatch in the Land Rover does it again. Is it? What flavour is it?
He's a monster.
Is he?
Sorry, I'll rephrase that.
Yeah, do you mind? I have to get the bleeping machine out.
He was a monster.
He's a good looking fox. We'll add that to our basket then, shall we?
He's a big one.
Where we were, we decided to give it one more call before we headed home, and luckily we did. Again, it happened really fast. I didn't capture it on film, but I did get this beautiful looking, almost silver fox to add to our tally of 6 for that night. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to follow the Instant Action on Instagram by following team_Foxer, and you can email me with any questions with the email on screen. Take care, stay safe, and as always, happy shooting.